Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Ajoe21love, here with another episode of Sports Overview Topics. Got a lot to go over on the podcast today, recapping UFC 258. Got a lot of news also with the release of JJ Watt, where I think he should go. My first NFL mock draft of the 2021 or for 2021 edition of the NFL Draft. News on the Pouncey brothers, as well as my thoughts on Lamelo Ball and the race for Rookie of the Year along with Colin Sexton. But the first thing I wanted to go over today, because it happened suddenly yesterday, and it kind of took me by a little bit by surprise. But Vincent Jackson, the former wide receiver of the San Diego Chargers and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, passed away in a hotel in the Tampa Bay area at 38 years old. One of the best wide receivers in recent memory and one of the best big men wide receivers in quite a while. He was a solid force for the Chargers for numerous years. He didn't play much his first 2 years, but once he found the groove, he found his way with Philip Rivers in that Chargers offense and was a force for a few years. And then he went to Tampa Bay in 2012, and which I thought was going to be a real helping force in as far as their quarterback situation goes. With Josh Freeman, him getting cut, I thought maybe his help would revive his career. Mike Glenn, James Winston, despite the quarterbacks in Tampa Bay, because when he left San Diego to go to Tampa Bay, the quarterback situation for him dipped in talent, but he managed to pull off numerous 1,000-yard seasons still with Tampa Bay, along with the emergence of Mike Evans. And then 2015, 2016, he his playing time pretty much dimmed down much, and he ultimately retired after the 2016 season, in which they almost made the playoffs but fell short. Nonetheless, he was a fun receiver, big man receiver, and it's unfortunate happening, and thoughts go out to his family and his former teammates, all those affected by it, but he will certainly be missed in the community of pro football. So with that getting out of the way, now I would like to go over some big news. So my first mock draft of the 2021 NFL season, now that the Super Bowl is out of the way, kind of get the gist. And now my 2021 first mock draft. So now let's get into it. Now, first of all, I have not done any trades. It's hard to predict trades in a draft. So I just leave out the trades. I just pick them as if all the teams stay. I know that sounds kind of cliche and boring, but it's difficult to predict trades. So I'm just predicting all as if all teams are staying at where they are. So with that, starting it with Jacksonville Jaguars. Everybody knows this. It seems it's pretty obvious at this point, but Trevor Lawrence, the number one overall pick out of Clemson. I think we all know um, after the work he's put in the last 3 years at Clemson. Started his first season, winning the national championship in a upset over Clemson. I mean, not Alabama, excuse me. And then last year, they came up short against LSU and that great team led by Joe Burrow. And then this year, coming up short in the Sugar Bowl against, or Rose Bowl, whichever, but coming up short against Ohio State and that great performance by Justin Fields. But still, nonetheless, Trevor Lawrence, the proverbial number one overall pick. Now, I'm curious because he's getting surgery on his torn labrum and on his non-throwing shoulder. So I'm curious how he's going to look when he gets drafted. If he'll have his arm in a sling, probably. But it's interesting to think about. Now, still 2 months, but interesting to think about. Now, next up, the second overall pick, the New York Jets. This is interesting because some people could perceive this as a viable trade at the number 2 spot, whether are the Jets in general, because Sam Darnold I pick, but presumably if they're saying number 2, I got him taking Penei Sewell out of Oregon. I know they picked Mekhi Becton last year, but ultimately, regardless of who the quarterback is, and we saw with the Colts, the best way to protect your quarterback is with a solid O-line. And, Mekhi Becton now taking Penei Sewell, potentially. They got some not household names on wide receiver and tight end, but they got some solid weapons. With Rashad Perriman, they took Denzel Mims last year, Jamison Crowder, Ryan Griffin. They got some good weapons. So, I mean, it could be a receiver, but I ultimately went with Penei Sewell out of Oregon. Now, another interesting pick, the Dolphins by way of the Texans. I went with a reunion and wide receiver Devontae Smith, the winner of the Heisman, got the reunion with Tua and should be fun. I mean, they have Devontae Parker, but as we've seen, he was kind of injury-riddled a little bit this year. And, I mean, adding another piece on that wide receiver core could help not only him, but could help Mike Gesicki in the middle and overall make that offense click more. So then, what may be controversial, but next up, the Falcons at 4. I got them taking Justin Fields of Ohio State. Now, here's the thing. I know Matt Ryan is established, and I mean, he's only 33, 34, still got some good years left. I know, but that's a big contract. And whether they keep him or trade him, they gotta start thinking about the future. And ultimately, a new head coach in Arthur Smith, a new system and a new GM, they're probably going to want their guy. So ultimately, kind of needs a change in Atlanta. Nothing against Matt Ryan, but this is about the future. And Justin Fields, I think, would be a good fit in Atlanta. Next up, number 5, the Bengals. Now, Penei Sewell, you could think this is a good spot for him to go to, but I am taken by the Jets. So instead, the Bengals will take Rashawn Slater out of Northwestern. Now, Rashawn Slater and Penei Sewell, there's been comparisons. Some may say that Rashawn Slater and Penei Sewell, there's not really much of a gap. So, still, the Bengals' priority is to protect Joe Burrow. And Joe Burrow, as we saw, got off to a good start, but unfortunately was hindered by that injury against Washington. So, taking Rashawn Slater, they got some good wide receivers to build around Joe Burrow, and it's a good start for that offense. Next up, the Eagles. I think it's pretty self-explanatory that they're going to take a receiver. Alshon Jeffrey, Deshaun Jackson, they seem likely that they're going to part ways with both of them, I would say. And, they need weapons at the receiver position. And Jamar Chase out of LSU, who opted out, but we saw him have that great game in the national title game versus Clemson, and it would just be a good fit, I believe, for the Eagles. With Jamar Chase and Jalen Reagor, you got some good foundational wide receivers to build around for Jalen Hurts at quarterback. Next up, at 7, the Detroit Lions. Now, originally, because this post Matthew Stafford, Jared Goff trade, you could say they may take a quarterback still, but I have them taking the best player on the board, which is Michael Parsons, linebacker, and they ride Jared Goff, but the problem for them last year was defense. And that defense was bad, just bad last year. And, them taking Parsons, okay, they got Akua, they got Trufant, Trey Flowers, they got some good pieces. That would be a nice conditional pieces for that defense to build around. Then we got at 8, the Panthers. I got them taking Zach Wilson, BYU. I mean, I love Teddy Bridgewater. The way he's coming back from that injury that he suffered as a member of the Vikings. But he had a subpar year last year with the Panthers. And ultimately, Zach Wilson, he probably won't come in the start right away, but they could keep Tay as sort of like a mentor role for him to learn on the sidelines. But I just think it would be a good pick for Carolina taking Zach Wilson. Next up, the Broncos. I mean, mostly defense, you would say. Because, their offense is loaded, you could say. You got a solid O-line, improving O-line, I would say. They took Judy and Hamler last year. Colin Sutton coming back. Noah Fant at tight end. I mean, so I go with Quinty Pay, defensive lineman for the Broncos. I mean, they got Shelby Harris. They traded for Jarrell Casey last year. I mean, so-and-so, they helped that pass rush because when they won the Super Bowl, I mean, they had the pass rush, they had that interior pressure, and I mean, sounds like a good fit. Quinty Pay. I mean, Bradley Chubb, Von Miller being back possibly. Seems like a skilled defense go with a loaded offense. If Drew Lock is ultimately can improve from last year. Then the Cowboys at 10. Interesting pick. It's intriguing because, I mean, Dak, I like Dak, but I don't think he's worth what he's asking for. And, they got some solid pieces on offense. And people have to realize their offense line was just hindered last year with injuries. Lyle Collins, Tyron Smith, Travis Frederick retired. I mean, just jeez. But ultimately, I'm going to go with Trey Lance at South Dakota State. I'm just going to go with Trey Lance. And, they take the cheaper version. And not to say Trey Lance is a cheaper version of Dak, but they pass on paying Dak the $40 million, I would say, and they move in a different direction. Next up, the Giants at 11 came close to winning the division, but on the bright side of not winning the division, they get a higher draft pick, and ultimately they take Jalen Waddle from Alabama, who was hurt in the middle of the season, but came back, had a solid performance in the national title game for Bama. Him complimenting Darius Slayton, Golden Tate, Evan Ingram. Those are some solid weapons for Daniel Jones to rebound and have a more improved, because when he was healthy, he was improving. And they kind of molded their offense and kind of went to his strengths, because he is mobile and he can run the ball. And with Saquon Barkley back, that's an interesting thought of an offense. So yeah, Jalen Waddle at 11. Next up, the Niners. Interesting. You could go both ways. You could go offense, could go defense. I mean, Mac Jones on the board. You don't know if they're going to keep Jimmy G. I'm ultimately going to go with Patrick Surtain, Alabama. Why? Because, Nick Bosa and Solomon Thomas will both be back for that defense, which will help. And then on the back end, because Richard Sherman, he is a free agent, and Carousel bring him back, but Patrick Surtain would be an interesting pick on the back end to pair with Jimmy Ward, and that would just be a good pick along with Fred Warner another year on their defense. Then we got number 13, the Chargers. This is a little bit of reach, but I think it will work. They take the third straight Crimson Tide and Najee Harris. They take him, Alabama. Why? Because if you think about that offense with Justin Herbert, the weapons they got at wide receiver with Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Hunter Henry, they could bring back, not sure, but it's not. And their defense is loaded. What was their Achilles heel on offense? Running back and O-line. and drafting Najee Harris, who's explosive and not just in the running game, but he can also pass catch out of the backfield. And it would just be a solid piece adding to that offense. And it would be a good fit, in my opinion, although a little bit of a reach. Next up, the Vikings at 14. Interesting pick because their O-line and their defense, they lost a lot on defense. But I think with the way the draft, in my opinion, is folding, I'm ultimately going with Kyle Pitts out of Florida. I mean, they're an offensive team right now. That's their way to win. Play offense and bend but don't break defense. And, Kyle Rudolph looks like they'll part ways with him. I know they like Irv Smith, but it's a two-way ad for Kyle Pitts because not only his ability to catch passes, but also run block, that would help mightily with that offense. And, the thought of the Vikings, Dalvin Cook out of the backfield, you have Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson out wide receiver. And then you got Irv Smith and Kyle Pitts at tight end. That's an interesting thought if you're a Vikings fan. Although Kyle Pitts may likely not fall to the Vikings, this is just how it falls down in my draft. But it would definitely be a good fit, and I don't think they could afford to pass him up at 14. Next up, the Patriots at 15. I mean, the thought is interesting because this has been kind of floating around. Our wide receivers didn't really, besides Jacoby Myers and Gunnar Olszewski, our wide receivers didn't really step up much this year. Now, Julian Edelman, he was hurt, which took a bolt out of our wide receiver game as well. I mean, our O-line, our running backs are still really well. Our defense kept us in games. Cam Newton, he had the fuzz. He was doing well to start the season, but then he fell. Ultimately, after COVID, I think they're likely to part ways. I'm not sure how they feel about Jarrett Stidham. That's the thing. I don't know. He's the only quarterback under contract next season. So with that, I'm having them taking Mac Jones. They take Mac Jones, and then maybe they take a veteran quarterback, free agency, Fitzpatrick, someone to compete for the backup spot. But, we still have to put pieces around them to help. But Seems like a good fit, Mac Jones with the Patriots. Then we got number 16, the Arizona Cardinals, who barely missed the playoffs last year. They did really well, 5-2, but it was a win or go home situation against the Rams. Kyler Murray wasn't 100%, and ultimately they fell and missed the playoffs. I mean, their offense took a much needed step up in Kyler Murray's development and the acquisition of DeAndre Hopkins. Now, Larry Fitzgerald, he may come back, might, we'll see. Ultimately, they got to help and get another piece on the offensive side. And I'm going with tight end Penn State, Pat Freiermuth. I think he'd be a good pick, good fit. And their offense, if they can be more balanced and acquisition like Freiermuth would definitely help on that offensive side. Now we got the Raiders at 17. Another team who just mightily missed on the playoffs. But they had an epic collapse for the second straight season. They were 6-3 and then went 2-5 down the stretch and missed the playoffs. And then the previous season they were 6-4 and were 1-5 down the stretch. So their offense has a lot of talent. They acquired they got Ruggs last year. They got Renfro. I mean, they got Jacobs in the backfield. They have a solid, nasty O-line. So this pick's about defense. And I'm going Christian Barmore out of Alabama to help that defense. Because, they got Max Crosby. But besides that, they don't really have a beast on defense. And he would ultimately help their defense, help out their offense. So now 18. The Dolphins' original pick, the Dolphins pick, excuse me, I have them taking Trey Smith, offensive lineman. Their offensive line, they need to help out Tua or whoever the quarterback is going to be, because that O-line it wasn't horrible, but they need to improve. And Eric Flowers, they're may cut ties with him. And they drafted Austin Jackson last year, but they need more help on the O-line, definitely. So then we go to 19, the Washington football team. Blowing on the defense side, they could use some help on offense. I mean, they got Terry McLaurin, they got Logan Thomas. They have some alright wide receivers. But I think getting another receiver and helping out that offense is another step they could take. I mean, they could. This is a spot I think is the highest spot where Kyle Trask could be taken. This is probably the highest pick for Trask, but I think ultimately they would take. I have them taking Rashad Bateman, wide receiver out of Minnesota. I think it would ultimately help out the offense. They have Terry McLaurin. The other thing is Kelvin Harmon. He did not play at all last year. So him, Bateman, Harmon, Logan Thomas, that's some pretty good weapons on the offense side with a solid offense line, whether it's Heineke, Alex Smith, someone. It would definitely help out the offense because that defense is loaded very much. This is another interesting pick. The Bears at 20. Um, you know, they're unlikely to sign Mitchell Trubisky back. I think it's likely they take Carson Wentz or Deshaun Watson. And because that O-line was leaky last year, where Kyle Long, he was basically calling out that offense and that along with front office of the Bears. But I think they add another piece to that line. They have some quality receivers and tight ends. So I think they take Elijah Vera Tucker, offense lineman, to help that O-line. Next up, the Colts at 21. I mean, offensively and defensively, they have solid pieces mostly across the board. But the one bad spot I would say that was kind of exposed at times last year was the secondary. So I have them taking cornerback Caleb Farley. Next up, the Titans at 22. I'm taking Nick Bolton out of Missouri, linebacker, who a lot of people have praised, who could go maybe in the top 15 or top 10. But I have been falling to the Titans, who need much help on that defense. Next up, the Jets, their second pick, by way of the Seahawks. They take Rondale Moore, wide receiver. Actually think about it, take it back. They take another O-lineman. They take Christian Darrisaw. And they really bulk out that offense line. Then next up, we got the Steelers at 24. They need a run game badly. No offense to Benny Snell or James Conner, but got him taking Travis Etienne out of Clemson. They need a running back badly to balance out that offense because they were kind of exposed when James Conner went out and they came back in, did okay, but yeah, they need balance on that offense. Next up, by way of the Rams and the Jalen Ramsey trade, the Jaguars again at 25. They take edge rusher Gregory Rousseau. I mean, him, Kayvon Chason, that's a nice young duo to build around. And another good pick by Urban Meyer. Could be taken earlier, but have him falling to the Jaguars at 25. Next up, 26, the Browns. I have them taking a linebacker, Jeremiah Owusu Cormo. Excuse me, sorry. They need help at the linebacker position, which killed them against Chiefs. And they have a solid duo up. Excuse me. They have a solid front four on defense and a pretty good secondary, but they need help on linebacker side, and I think Karamoa would help out. Next up, what might be the steal of the first round if it were to happen. I have the Ravens at 27, or taking wide receiver Justin Ross, who, had a neck injury, I believe, or a cyst. I forgot the injury, but it was out the whole 2020 season for Clemson, but previously he was a very good foundational piece, instrumental in their national title winning season 2018 and 2019. He helped out as well, but the injury would have him falling. So I would have the Ravens, who need receiver help, taking Justin Ross. Next up, the Saints have them taking quarterback DeRyan Kendrick. They need to let go of a bunch of starters, I would say, to fit their cap space. And, they could cut ties with Jackrabbit Janoris Jenkins and ultimately pairing Kendrick up with Lattimore sounds like a decent duo for the secondary. So, would be interesting. Next up, the Packers at 29 have them taking edge rusher Patrick Jones III. I mean, yes, they took Jordan Love last year when they could have taken a receiver. Now, the big receivers have been taken off the board. Chris Olave, maybe, but he could be a reach at this spot. their defense could not stop really the Buccaneers in the NFC title game. Same last year or the year prior against the 49ers. They were 0. And so their defense has pretty much looked the same the last 2 years. And they need help. So Patrick Jones may need help. Hopefully, that defense. Next up, the Bills, who had a terrific season on offense. Their defense had troubles with Kansas City, which, I mean, most teams have trouble against Kansas City's offense, but I have them taking Joseph Osai out of Texas, linebacker. They need help on that linebacker side with Matt Milano, who they may cut ties with. They need speed on that linebacker position. Hopefully, Osai can give them the much needed help they need. Now getting into the Super Bowl teams. Last two, the Chiefs and the Buccaneers. Chiefs at 31. I mean, I don't think it's going to be offense. So, but their defense wasn't bad last year. It was pretty decent, pretty good last year. But when I look at who's left, I say I have them taking Levi Onwuzurike, defense lineman out of Washington. I mean, Frank Clark, he hasn't really lived up to his contract. When they traded him basically for D Ford, Chris Jones has that big contract. Alex Okafor is getting up in age, so that's a thought. But yeah. Then we have the Buccaneers at 32 to close out the first round. Interesting dynamic. Because, they have a bunch of free agents. Gronk, Antonio Brown, Godwin, Ndamukong Suh, Shaq Barrett. They're not going to be able to sign everybody. And, Tom Brady, he has a year left, but this team is ready to win now. And, they could take Trask, think about the future, but it would kind of set the team back a little. And this team, they just came off the Super Bowl, and they still seem primed to repeat, as people would say. So, tough. I'd go with Zaven Collins, linebacker, Tulsa. Shaq Barrett, they may not be able to resign. Ndamukong Suh, we'll see, but maybe a nice fit for Zaven Collins and the Bucs. So there was that. That was my first mock draft of 2021 of the season. Hope you guys enjoyed it. May argue with it, may not. I'll probably make another one as the month ends in March. We'll see. So there's that. Now getting into news on J.J. Watt. J.J. Watt, he was released by the Texans. I mean, the best player in that franchise, basically. The Texans, the best one they've had since they started in 2002. Now, 2011 to 2015, he was a monster. He was a monster. Now, the last 5 years, the injuries have caught up to him a little bit. His production has dimmed down, obviously, but he's still a very good foundational piece. And he was healthy all the way through last season. So I think he would want to go to a team that is ready to win. Now, the Packers, because he went to Wisconsin college, that's the thought. Of course, his brothers Derek and TJ are on the Steelers. People will pinpoint that. The Ravens, possibly. The Browns. The Raiders, the Titans. There's a lot of teams that could use them. Personally, when I think about it, I'm going with the Titans. Mike Vrabel has coached him before, and they could use help on that defense a lot to balance out that offense. And J.J. Watt, he would get to face the Texans twice a year. So that's another added bonus. Plus, I don't think it would be a big contract. So that's a nice ideal. So that's my pick, the Titans. Then touching up on a bit, UFC 258 main event, the recap, Kamaru Usman, Gilbert Burns, former training partners. It was a fun fight leading into it. I mean, like I said, former training partners, they know each other well. Kamaru Usman's been on a tear. Gilbert Burns has had a good winning streak as well, capping off against Tyron Woodley in his last fight. But it was back and forth. They rocked each other early on, but ultimately in the third round, Usman finished him, and that's his 13th win, breaking GSP's record, I believe. But hats off to Kamaru Usman.